Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily. And if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Now, let's begin today's story. At 23 I made the cardinal mistake of many Indians, which is marrying young when I wasn't emotionally or financially ready. My wife and I knew each other from school. Both of us didn't go to college and we reconnected a couple of years after graduation. I was working in retail and she wasn't really doing anything. She had always lived off her parents and didn't even move out. She always struggled with keeping jobs and she probably got fired from like 5 minimum wage jobs after graduation. When we reconnected, we hit it off, and against all better judgment, we decided to get married. The problem was, we both had nothing. I was struggling to pay rent in a tiny one-bedroom apartment and my job was barely getting me by. I didn't even have a car and just took the bus everywhere. On the other side, she was unemployed and didn't seem to plan on getting a job anytime soon. Literally, all of my friends advised me not to get married in general, not specifically to her, but I was dumb and impulsive and we took that step anyway. Her parents were fed up with her leeching off of them, and they were more than happy to have her out of the house. They didn't even care if I was broke or the conditions she would be living in. They trusted that she would make do and they let her go. Ironically, they always came up with a bunch of excuses for us not to visit. I think after she left the house, they were so relieved that they could finally start living and they were rarely at home and never wanted us to go. They also never visited us in our apartment, even though we weren't that far. Upon marriage, my wife and I agreed that we would both work and make do together. She promised me that she would find a job and that she would help around with rent and expenses. Of course, that didn't happen. She would always make some excuse and eventually she told me that she wanted to be a stay-at-home wife, and that was that. The thing that annoyed me the most that I didn't even realize was how much she would be pushy. I didn't have a lot of money, but she would always ask for a ton of money to buy useless stuff. She would take the money meant for the house and buy clothes with half of it, and anytime I tried to discuss her spending habits, she would tell me that I was her husband and that it was my job to make her happy and provide for her. Sometimes I'd find myself borrowing money from friends just to pay off installments on some useless gizmo she bought online. It was getting way too much, but I wanted to make her happy. Anytime we would see others who were more fortunate, she would subtly guilt-trip me by saying stuff like, "Look at them. They probably go to this fancy restaurant often." Or she would always point out other people's stuff like cars or houses or whatever, and it always made me feel worse about myself and my capabilities. A couple of years had gone by and things were hard but somewhat stable. We upgraded to a 2-bedroom apartment that I found a good rent deal on. She was still staying at home and I was busting my butt getting money, but it seemed like nothing satisfied her, and no matter how much I made, it never felt enough for her. Of course, as marriages go, we started arguing and things weren't always peaky. Once things had settled down and we became in a better position, we started having the kids argument. We weren't financially comfortable, but we were doing much better than before. I opened up the kids' discussion several times, not right then and there, but as a future plan. I was shocked to see how much she was against this idea though, and she flat out told me that she never wanted to have kids. I tried to reason with her, but she was extremely stubborn and wouldn't change her mind. I had always wanted to be a father and this was important to me. I wanted to have that feeling, but she wasn't interested in the slightest in being a mother. At that point, I realized just how immature and irresponsible she really was. She didn't want to work, didn't want to have kids, and just wanted to live off everybody else. We had a big argument about the whole thing, where at the end she told me that if I wanted kids this badly, I should go find another woman to have my kids. About 3 months later, things were quieter and we hadn't had an argument in a bit. It was our anniversary, so naturally, things got romantic. Sometime later, she started throwing up and being sick. We both guessed what came after, but she kept refusing to take a pregnancy test. I told her that we had to know for sure and she kept being in extreme denial and just kept telling me that she had the flu. We spent 2 days arguing about this, and I could tell that she was nervous and so against the idea. Eventually, I pressured her enough into taking the test, and as anyone could have expected, it was positive. I was absolutely thrilled, and even though we didn't have a lot of money, I was still very excited. I was grinning and laughing and already thinking of names, while she was angry and complaining and crying. I told her that we would make it work and that I'd find a better job and support her, but she flat out told me 10 minutes after taking the test that she wanted an abortion. I was shocked at how blunt she was, and I never wanted things to get to that. I refused and told her that this wasn't an option and that we needed to think things through, but she threw a fit and kept yelling, telling me that she wanted an abortion and that she wouldn't take no for an answer. It got to a big argument and she said some pretty hurtful stuff. She told me that she didn't want some kid to raise and that she wouldn't care about them. She reached new heights, telling me that she was wasting her youth on being married and that she shouldn't have married so young and wasted so much of her life, and that she wasn't going to add a baby to all of this to waste more of it. I didn't know she was so resentful, and I told her that she didn't have a life to waste in the first place. I told her that she was 23 and acting like she was still 15 on her parents' couch, not wanting to do anything or take any responsibility. She didn't care and stormed off to her parents' house. The next day, I got a call from her parents telling me that she would be coming back here and that they don't want her to leave the house and go over to them again. She came back shamefully, and it seems like her parents scolded her and refused the abortion. She told me that she would be keeping the baby, and I was so happy and excited. Over the next 3 months, I started going into full dad mode. I built a crib and decorated the second bedroom for the baby and bought a ton of parenting books. I started going to a ton of interviews and finally found a pretty high-paying job that would allow me to mortgage a house. On the day I got the job, I came back home so excited to tell my wife, and I found her inside bluntly telling me that she got an abortion. I felt my whole life crumbling. All the excitement I had was shattered, and I had never felt so angry before in my life. I yelled and fought, and she just told me that she didn't want it and that she didn't care and never did. I called her parents, who got just as angry as I was, and I told them that I'd be sending her back to them, but they told me that they didn't want her and that she should stay over at my house. I went over to her parents to discuss this, and they told me things I had never known before. They told me that when my wife was 16, she got pregnant by her best friend's brother and she had an abortion, which ruined her relationship with her best friend and her parents. Ever since then, she couldn't keep a friend, and her parents lost all respect for her. Her parents wanted to keep her in my house as punishment. I offered the idea of divorce, but my wife went nuts and told me that if we get a divorce, she would be living on the streets. She wanted to stay, even though she was clearly unhappy. I told her that she would stay, but she would have to follow my every word, and I told her that I would be marrying another woman. I married another woman who had no issues with living with another wife, and we lived in the new house I mortgaged. My first wife lived on the top floor while my second wife and I lived on the bottom floor. My first wife started going even crazier, though, and she even attempted to hurt my second wife a number of times. Every time I would tell her to leave the house, she would throw a fit and call me a monster, and that she would be living in the streets. I could see that she simply was not well. I had her stay at the house and she rarely went outside. My second wife got pregnant, and my first wife literally attempted to murder the baby by putting something in my second wife's drink, and we ran to the ER. Ever since that moment, I started treating her very harshly. Since she wouldn't leave the house and wouldn't get a divorce, I started treating her more like a maid than a wife. She was the one responsible for cooking and cleaning, and she had to keep everything in pristine condition. Anytime she didn't want to carry out her responsibilities, I would threaten to kick her out and leave her to fend for herself out in the world. Another time, she kept trying to have a fallout between my second wife and I by spreading misinformation to both of us. She would tell my second wife that I'd be staying at home to do something while I was going out. Another time, I was supposed to be out of town for a couple of days, and she told my second wife that I'd spend a whole week, so my second wife went over to her parents' house, and when I came back home 2 days later, I didn't find her. As for the other side, she would tell my second wife lies about me and about other women I was talking to, which led to several trust-related arguments between me and my second wife. I had had enough when I realized that all of these were just lies she came up with. I became extremely strict with her and punished her several times for acting up. Over time, I felt like she was getting crazier and crazier. One time, she started a fight with the neighbors, and the whole neighborhood watched, to the point where she threw stuff through the neighbors' windows and they called the cops. I didn't understand her thought process, and I confronted her, telling her that she was just a burden on me now, and that I'm only keeping her inside the house because I know she wouldn't last 2 days outside. I told her how much I hated her for killing all of my passion for being a dad and being so nonchalant about it. She dropped a bomb on me and told me that the only reason she married me was that she wanted someone to take care of her financially, and that most of the guys she knew about the whole pregnancy and abortion thing from high school, and that they wouldn't accept her. She told me that she married me because I was a pushover who wouldn't give her any grief and would just act like a good husband. She told me that she never liked me back at school, but because I was somewhat of a smart kid, I was her only shot. I realized just how much of a leech she actually is, and I despised her even more for it. I instructed my second wife to treat her like a maid too, and she did. I found her constantly berating her for every little thing and humiliating her. One time, we had guests over and she literally called for my first wife as the maid, and when she dropped something, she humiliated her in front of all of the guests, who laughed at her. She spent that night crying and she started developing a painkillers problem. I told her several times that she can just leave and go find someone else to leech off, but for some reason, she would rather live this humiliating life than go and seek out her own life outside. She started taking pills heavily, and we often found her passed out on the floor at night several times. Things only got crazier from there. One time, we got a call from the local police station that they found my first wife in a fight with the local pharmacist. We didn't know why, and she flat out refused to tell us. We kept going back and forth, but nothing. She told us that she was arguing over a prescription medicine the pharmacist refused to give her, and that was that. I thought it was her pills problem, but the police told us that there were no painkillers involved. Something was up, though, and I needed to find out what. I kept a close eye on my first wife, who was now a burden on me as a kid would have been to her. I still had a shred of care even though I wished that she would leave the house. I kept keeping track of any unusual behavior she was exhibiting because of her alcoholism. We tried to get her help, but she refused. She just wanted to sit around the house and drink all day. One day, though, I found something interesting in the trash. I found a pregnancy test. At first, I thought it was the old one my second wife had since she was 2 months pregnant, but she told me that it wasn't. What's interesting was that the test was positive. There was only one other person who could have had the test, and instead of confronting her, I called her parents and demanded that they come and talk to her about this. After some arguing, they finally came and I told them everything. They were very intense and yelled at her violently, and she eventually confessed. She was pregnant by the same ex-best friend's brother. We were all furious, and I saw her dad slap her across the face so violently that it literally echoed across the house. He swore that he would kill her for tarnishing his name and his honor, and we literally had to hold him back from beating her to death. We suddenly found my father-in-law calling someone and telling him about the other guy who was the father, and it seemed as if he was getting people to go beat him up. I told her that this was the final straw and that she can't stay in my house anymore. I kicked her out in front of her parents and they couldn't even say anything. They rejected her going back to their house, and she literally only left with her bag and not a single penny. I didn't know what would happen to her and I didn't care. A week later, my second wife gave birth to a baby boy and I was the happiest dad ever. I kept thinking about my first wife and how all of this could have been avoided if she hadn't gotten that abortion, and if she held any kind of responsibility, but I didn't care. I was finally happy and got what I wanted. One day, about a year later, I was out walking in the markets when I saw someone who looked vaguely like my first wife in the streets. I looked closer and it really was her, holding a little baby as she was selling vegetables on the street. She was homeless and it seems that she still didn't get a job. I didn't care, however, and left without saying a word. Now, here we comes to the end of today's story, and I hope you guys are enjoying my daily content. So before leaving, I want to hear your thought about this story in the comments section, and what's your opinion about OP's entitled wife. Also, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more satisfying revenge stories.